Hey everyone, Sylvie here. I hope everyone is doing well tonight. The video that I have for you guys tonight has been a long time coming. I do apologize for the delay. However, I am ready to tackle it now. So without further ado, this is my part 4 of my Jonbenet Ramsey series. The first 3 parts of the series have been posted for a while, so if you have not caught those, please do go back and watch them first. There will be some information in those videos that I probably will not discuss again in this video here. Okay, so the point of this video is to focus on possible involvement of Patsy Ramsey in Jonbenet Ramsey's death. And I also want to do a bit of a final conclusion. So this will be more of a kind of a compilation of the visions that I have had around the Jonbenet Ramsey case. Since I do want to focus on Patsy in this particular video because of the fact that really my first part outlined the case and talked about a very brief vision that I had around Patsy. But then my other 2 videos were focused on Burke and John Ramsey. So, like I said, this will be an overall compilation, a final conclusion of the case, but it's going to focus mostly on Patsy Ramsey. I will reiterate some of the things that I talked about in the other videos just for context, so that you guys don't have to go back and watch those videos just to understand this video. But like I said before, please do go back and watch those videos in their entirety if you have not already, because there definitely is going to be some information tidbits in those videos that I likely will not discuss in this video. I do want to put my disclaimer out there really quickly. This is a compilation video of my visions, so it is my thoughts and opinions and interpretations of the things that I'm seeing and feeling. It is not by any means a proven fact. I am not saying anything in this video is 100% proven fact. I may talk about some details that people accept as proven, but it doesn't necessarily mean that any of this information is 100% concrete fact. Now, this is a case that's been going on for quite some time, so there is a lot of varying information. People have a lot of opinions, but it is an unsolved case. So I don't really know exactly what we can call 100% absolute fact, just because of the circumstances around possible corruption in the police department and things of that nature. At any rate, like I said, this video is based 100% on my opinions and interpretations. Okay, I also want to give just a little bit of a spoiler here because I don't want people coming at me talking about how ridiculous it is to have a theory that Patsy Ramsey killed Jonbenet after all the evidence that has come out and yada yada yada. I want to make it 100% clear right at the very beginning of this video. I am not saying that Patsy Ramsey killed Jonbenet Ramsey. Okay, I am not saying that. I'm not going to say that at any point in this video. I do not believe that. I am not saying that Patsy Ramsey harmed Jonbenet in any way, and that's what led to her death. Okay, so just to get that out of the way, a little bit of a spoiler. If you're just waiting to tear the video apart because you're 100% certain that Patsy Ramsey didn't kill Jonbenet, you don't even need to watch the video because I'm not going to say that, okay? My opinions and interpretations have absolutely nothing to do with Patsy actually being directly involved in Jonbenet's death. And if you have gone and watched my other videos already, you know that I don't believe that Burke Ramsey or John Ramsey were directly involved in Jonbenet's death either. So just a little, quick spoiler, quick disclaimer once again there, that I am not reiterating any of those theories that the family killed Jonbenet. Just a little bit of a reminder here as I get into the actual bulk of this video. In the part 1 of this Jonbenet Ramsey series, I had given just a little bit of a description about a brief vision that I had had around Patsy Ramsey that actually kind of sparked me to do this whole series in the first place, because it was something that I hadn't seen before, I hadn't heard before, I hadn't really heard anybody else talk about or propose as a possible cause or motive for the case. just a brief recap, what I had seen in that vision that I had explained in part 1 was basically Patsy Ramsey. She was standing outside. It was night. She was standing next to a garage that I do not believe belonged to their house because I could see some tan or some beige siding. She was wearing a long beige trench coat, and she was speaking to someone who was standing off in the shadows, standing in the darkness. There were some tall, manicured pine trees, I believe, right next to her on one side, and this person was kind of standing off in the darkness that was being created by the shadow of the garage and the trees. And the only thing that I could really hear during that conversation was Patsy saying to this person, "I'll take care of the note." That brief vision was what led me to speculate that Patsy Ramsey had actually hired someone. Obviously, this would not have been an actual kidnapping, it would have been a staged kidnapping, but that she had done this in order to manipulate John in some way. And I know that a lot of people probably think that that's a little bit crazy. I know a lot of people probably think, why in the world would Patsy Ramsey stage a kidnapping and terrify her own daughter just to manipulate her husband? I don't know that. I'm not going to presume that. In covering these true crime cases, one thing I do know is that parents will do some very messed up things to their own children, and I don't believe that anyone could ever possibly know why or what motivated them to do so. At any rate, I do still feel at this point in time that Patsy Ramsey did have some involvement in encouraging someone to come in and to stage a kidnapping of her own daughter. If you are curious and or intrigued, please do stay with me because the rest of this video is going to give explanations for this theory, why I am postulating this, the visions that I've had around Patsy Ramsey, and the thoughts and interpretations that I've had that have led me to believe that such a conclusion is a strong possibility. The first visions that I want to discuss around Patsy Ramsey actually do not have anything at all to do with Jonbenet's case. They have to do with just Patsy herself, like in an everyday context, just going about her daily life, and I found them a little bit interesting. And the first vision is of Patsy standing in a hallway talking to a man. The man has his back to me, so I only see his back, and then I see Patsy kind of as if I was standing behind the man and looking around him and looking at Patsy. They're having a nice conversation. She's smiling, she's laughing. They seem to be getting along very well. At one point, she reaches up and she kind of touches his arm, just kind of slides her hand down his arm just a little bit. It's a very affectionate touch. And it seems like she might have, I'm not sure, questionable relationship with this person. And by questionable, I simply mean that he's definitely not her husband. So I'm not 100% certain during that vision who he is, but I know that he's not John Ramsey and that she seems to be interacting with him in a somewhat affectionate way. I believe they may be standing in the hallway of like a school or a community building or something like that. Not that that's really important, but it's a public place, a public venue. They're both there for the same reason, maybe a school play or something like that. Okay, so the next vision that I see around Patsy Ramsey in this real world context is Patsy once again talking to the same man. But in this instance, I can see that the man that Patsy is talking to is Alex Hunter. If you're not aware who Alex Hunter is, please go back and look into Jonbenet's case because he played a huge role in the case. He was very integral to the case. He is the Boulder District Attorney. Well, he's retired now, but at the time he was the Boulder District Attorney that was overseeing Jonbenet's case. And that does not have anything to do with the case itself. I don't believe that there was any kind of premeditation or that Patsy was talking to Alex Hunter prior to anything happening to Jonbenet because, it was premeditated or something like that. I believe that it was just a crazy random happenstance that Patsy and Alex Hunter already had some kind of relationship prior to anything happening to Jonbenet. Just a quick bit of information on Alex Hunter. Like I said, he was the Boulder District Attorney. He apparently became Boulder District Attorney in 1972, and then he retired in 2001. And of course, Jonbenet's case was December 25th, 1996. So he presided over the case. He was also the person who had decided not to bring any charges against the Ramseys in the case. And we could go on and talk about that for such a long time. There's so much detail in that. And maybe at some point on down the line, we will look into that just a little bit further. But since this is focusing directly on Patsy and not necessarily the details of the case itself, I'm not going to go into a whole lot more about Alex's involvement there. Just know that he did end up playing an integral part in Jonbenet's case, and I'm seeing in these visions that there was a pre-established relationship. I actually really believe what it is that I'm seeing in these brief visions, these brief interactions with Patsy Ramsey and Alex Hunter, is I do firmly believe that Patsy was having an affair with Alex. And like I said, I don't think that that had anything to do with Jonbenet's case. I don't believe in coincidences, so I find it to be a little bit crazy that, may have played out before anything actually happened to Jonbenet. But I do not believe that it was premeditated. I don't think that Patsy formed a relationship with him because she planned on doing something on down the road. Okay, I think that that's something that just occurred. Patsy and Alex probably met on many occasions. The Ramseys were an affluent family. I'm sure they were relatively involved in the community. Jonbenet did the pageants. So I'm sure that a lot of people probably knew who they were. I don't believe that Boulder, Colorado was all that large of a city in the 1990s, so it's not that far-fetched to believe that these people had prior interactions. At any rate, who knows where they met? Who knows how they came into contact? Who knows how things came to be? But regardless, anyway, based on what I'm seeing in the interactions that I'm seeing in these visions, I really do firmly believe that Patsy Ramsey and Alex Hunter had been having an affair. Now, I'm not saying that this is because of anything horrible that was going on in John and Patsy Ramsey's marriage. I think that it probably had more to do with the fact that John was gone quite a lot. He had a lot of responsibility. He was the CEO of a subsidiary of Lockheed Martin. He traveled a lot. He worked late a lot. He was gone a lot of the time. And I think that maybe Patsy was just lonely and she was looking for some comfort. And she, not so coincidentally, found that in Alex Hunter. Now, if we can go off of the visions for just a brief moment and think about this somewhat logically, it actually makes a certain amount of sense that maybe Patsy and Alex did have some kind of relationship prior to Jonbenet's case. Because if you think about the handling of the case itself, it is very strange the way that things were handled. It did seem like Alex Hunter had some kind of an intimate relationship with the Ramseys, even though they had claimed to have never met each other prior to the case. I don't know that Alex Hunter necessarily had anything against John directly. I don't believe that he did. Even if he was having an affair with John's wife, it doesn't mean that he hated the man. It doesn't mean that he wanted anything bad to happen to John Ramsey. Like I said, it doesn't mean that Patsy hated John just because she was having an affair. It could just possibly mean that, she was lonely. And there doesn't have to be hate or animosity or anything like that for an affair to be taking place, is what I'm trying to say. Anyway, I just feel that it's not that strange. It's not that far of a stretch. And I do feel that Patsy Ramsey and Alex Hunter having been involved in an extramarital affair would make a lot of sense and would explain an awful lot of the behaviors and the failure to bring charges against the Ramseys in Jonbenet's case. Okay, moving along to another brief vision that actually has more to do with the case itself. Now, I had talked a little bit ago about how I had the brief vision where Patsy was speaking to someone and she said, "I'll take care of the note." I know that it is very cut and dry in people's opinions. You either believe Patsy wrote the note or you believe Patsy did not write the note. I don't think that there's too many people that are on the fence about whether Patsy wrote the note or not. People just seem to be very firmly rooted in their opinion as to whether she physically wrote that note. I personally believe that Patsy did write the note, and that doesn't have anything to do with any visions that I've had. That just has to do with, in my opinion, common sense. But like I said, if you don't believe she wrote the note, that's fine. I'm sure you have your reasons for that. But I've always believed that she did, and the brief vision that I had around that instance does seem to support that. So basically what I see in this short vision is I see Patsy sitting at a little side table, like she's pulled a chair in from another room, maybe a dining room, and she's sitting at this kind of narrow little table next to the kitchen, I think. And there is a bookshelf hanging on the wall above where she's sitting. Now, I believe that what I'm seeing is actually a few days before Christmas. Like maybe it's the 22nd or the 23rd of December. It seems like it's in the afternoon, maybe late in the afternoon. I can kind of see the afternoon sun coming through the windows. I can hear the kids playing in the background. So Jonbenet and Burke are off somewhere else in the house playing. They're being kind of loud, but, Patsy doesn't seem to be too worried about what it is that they're doing. So she's sitting here with the pad of paper. She's sitting here with the pen. And I can tell that she's contemplating, she's trying to decide what it is that she's trying to write. Once again, we could go on for an eternity about the note itself, about the speculation. There's been so much information about the note. I'm just going to go off my vision here, you guys, and tell you what I'm seeing, okay? So just my opinion and my interpretation of what I'm seeing. Many times people have said that there were 2 practice notes and then the final note, and all of that was evident on the notepad. Well, what I'm seeing is that Patsy writes Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey. And then instead of tearing that paper off and then writing a slash for like a second practice note, I just see that she writes Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey, and then she just crosses that out. And then she tears that piece of paper off and she crumbles it up and she sets it next to her on the little table. Then she goes back and she writes Mr. Ramsey. And as we all know, the final note started Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully, and then went on to explain the demands. At any rate, that's what I see, as I see Patsy sitting there writing the note. Now, after a little bit of time goes by, I think that Patsy hears the garage door. I can hear John's voice in the background. I think maybe he's saying, "I'm home." So Patsy rushes to put the note somewhere. She stands up and she grabs this kind of large book off of the bookshelf that's hanging on the wall, and she puts the note inside of it, and then she puts the book back onto the shelf. And then just a few seconds later, John comes around the corner and he puts his briefcase down, and the kids come running in, and it's like a typical family when Dad gets home from work. These few little visions around Patsy were somewhat brief, but they often are when I'm trying to get some context around a case or a situation. So now this is when my visions will start to get into a little bit more of Patsy's movements on the night that Jonbenet was ultimately killed. In part 3 of this series, where I focused on John Ramsey, I had given a bit of a description about the night that the Ramseys had gotten home from their Christmas celebrations. So I had talked about how Jonbenet was sound asleep. I believe the Ramseys had reiterated that themselves on several occasions. And I spoke about how John took Jonbenet straight upstairs to her room, that he got the kids ready for bed. I'm not going to go over John's specific movements too much in this video, but I might reiterate some of the things that I mentioned in the other video just once again for context. So the Ramseys are coming in the house. John's taking Jonbenet upstairs to put her to bed, and Patsy and Burke are still downstairs. Now, this is the part where I had talked about before that Burke did ask if he could have a snack. And Patsy tells him in my part 3, I mentioned that Patsy tells him, if you can get the snack yourself, then you can have it. And she just goes on upstairs. So at this point in time, I think that Patsy is very deep in her thoughts. She's not really thinking about taking care of the kids or any of the things that she would normally do when they get home at night. She's just kind of lost in her own thoughts. So she's basically like, Bert can get his own snack, and she just goes on upstairs. I see her walking right past the kids' rooms, on up to the 3rd floor, on up to her room, and straight into the bathroom. So basically, she's just decided that John is going to get the kids to sleep that night. When Patsy is upstairs by herself, as far as what I'm seeing in my visions, her demeanor is very calm, very, I would call kind of cold. She doesn't seem to be exhibiting a lot of emotion. She doesn't really seem anxious or nervous or anything like that. She seems like she's deep in thought. She seems like she has a goal, or that she has something that she's going to see through to the end. And I know that this is a little silly to talk about it in retrospect, because if Patsy did in fact do these things, then obviously that's probably the way that she would be feeling. But like I said, these are just my opinions and interpretations of what I'm seeing. So, okay, some of the information is going to overlap just a little bit here, because this would be the part where John finishes getting the kids ready for bed. Everybody's tucked in. He comes upstairs, and Patsy's still in the bathroom. So he gets into the bed, and like I explained in my video focused on him, he is sitting there. He's reading a book. He's basically just waiting for Patsy to come to bed. So Patsy finally comes out of the bathroom. She's wearing a long nightgown, goes all the way down to her feet. It's light blue, I believe. And she just gets into the bed. She gives John a small little kiss, and then she says goodnight, and she turns over and acts as if she's going to go to sleep. So she basically lays down. She turns her back to him, facing the opposite direction, and she acts as if she's going to go to sleep. So John puts all his stuff away. He lays down. He turns his back to her and, faces the opposite direction and lays down to go to sleep. So I see the two of them laying there in the bed together, and they're basically, laying there with their backs to each other. So Patsy is facing the stairway up to the bedroom, and John is facing the wall. Okay, this is the part where things start to get a little bit interesting. So I think it's only about 10 minutes or so before John is asleep. He's snoring. He's definitely out cold. Patsy is laying there on her side, and she is still wide awake. She very quietly gets up out of the bed. She puts on a robe, and she goes downstairs. I honestly don't have any idea what time of night it is at this point, but I think that it's probably fairly late, like around maybe 12:30 or 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm not 100% certain about that, but it seems like it's fairly late, but not, too late. Patsy creeps down the stairs, and she peeks into Jonbenet's room. Jonbenet is still in there sleeping very peacefully. So Patsy continues on down the spiral stairs. She goes over to the bookcase. She takes the note out of the book, and she lays it just on the edge of that thin table that she wrote the note at. And now this is just speculation on my part, but I believe the reason that she's doing this is because it's kind of like an agreed upon sign between her and the person that she's hired to come in to kidnap Jonbenet, stage the kidnapping, where, she's going to lay the note on the table here on the corner, and if in the morning when she gets up, if the note has been moved to the stairs, then she knows that the plan is going forward as planned. So I believe that's what I'm seeing there. I think that it's kind of a signal. It's a sign to let her know, yes, the plan is in motion. After Patsy places the note onto the little table, she walks over towards the garage, I believe it's towards the garage, and she flips a light switch. And I think that this was the signal to let this person know that everyone's gone to bed, everyone's sleeping, the note's been put in the place, and now the plan can be put into motion. I do want to back up momentarily just to quickly discuss a little bit more about the person that Patsy is talking to. Now, in the first part of this series, I did explain that I do firmly believe that the person that actually ended up killing Jonbenet Ramsey is Gary Oliva. And he is one of the people that did confess to Jonbenet's murder. And I know that crazy people confess to murders they didn't commit all of the time, but I really think that there's a lot more behind this. And I really do think that Gary Oliva is the person that I'm seeing in these visions that I have around Jonbenet's case. So I do believe that it is Gary Oliva that I see Patsy speaking to next to the garage. And I do also believe that it is Gary Oliva that Patsy is signaling with the light when she turns the light on that I just described in my other brief little vision. I know one of the biggest questions that people are going to have for me is why? Why would Patsy hire Gary Oliva to stage a kidnapping of Jonbenet and do all these things to disrupt her family and cause all of these problems? Well, initially I thought that it had something to do with the pageants that Jonbenet was in. I thought maybe that John wanted to allow Jonbenet to continue to do the pageants and Patsy wanted to stop, and she thought that she needed to manipulate John in some way so that he would see that the pageants weren't good for Jonbenet. Well, now after having just a few more visions and getting a little bit more feeling and energy around the case, I don't actually believe that Patsy's manipulation of John had anything to do with Jonbenet's pageants. I actually think that it had more to do with the fact that Patsy Ramsey wanted to move back to Atlanta. I don't think that she enjoyed living in Boulder, Colorado. I don't think that she wanted to stay there. I think that she wanted to go home to her family and friends that she had in Atlanta because they were both originally from Atlanta. I believe that Patsy was born in Atlanta, and maybe John was too. I'm not sure about that, though. I know moving back to the city that you came from probably seems like a simple conversation for a husband and wife, but if you think about the Ramseys' situation at the time, John was the CEO of a subsidiary of Lockheed Martin, which I already mentioned, and he had a great deal of responsibility. And I think that it would probably have been a very difficult time in their life for John to have picked up and gone back to Atlanta because he had made himself such a life there. He'd built up his business. He had managed to build himself up and merge himself into a very influential position in a very influential company. And it had been a lot of work. And no doubt, John probably didn't want to leave that behind. Or he probably thought that it would make it much more difficult for him to do his job if they moved back to Atlanta. Really, if you think about it, it doesn't seem like it's that far of a stretch. Because think about what it says in the ransom note. It talks about John Ramsey's business. It talks about the amount of his most recent bonus as the ransom amount. Like, it's just all very tied to John's business. And it doesn't seem that strange to me that maybe Patsy had gotten to a point where she thought that she had no other choice. If she really, really wanted to leave, if she really, really wanted to move back to Atlanta, she may have felt the only way to do that was to make John feel as if Boulder was unsafe for the children. Another question that's sure to arise is how would someone like Patsy Ramsey even know someone like Gary Oliva, who was a known harmer of children, who was a known criminal, who I believe had quite a record even before he confessed to Jonbenet's murder. I have to say that I do not have a lot of specific visions around that relationship. The only thing that I can say is that I do get the very distinct feeling that there was another person involved. So I really feel like Patsy was made aware of Gary Oliva by someone else, by a third party. I feel like it was a man. I don't believe that it's Alex Hunter. I don't think that he has anything to do with that. I don't think that he knows Gary Oliva or that he put Gary Oliva in touch with Patsy in any way whatsoever. I think that this is someone else, and I don't know who this person is. I know there has been a lot of speculation as to whether Fleet White, who was a family friend of the Ramseys, was involved in any way whatsoever. I know that Alex Hunter, the Boulder DA, had speculated or proposed on many occasions that Fleet White was part of some kind of pedophile ring or something like that. I don't know exactly what went on with all of that. I haven't looked into it too deeply. I don't necessarily believe that that was the case. I don't necessarily believe that it was some kind of syndicated ring or anything like that. But I do believe that there was a third person involved who did get Gary Oliva into the mix, and that they may have even put the idea of staging a kidnapping into Patsy's head in the first place. Okay, so back to my actual vision. So after Patsy flips the light switch, she just goes ahead and goes back on upstairs, and then I don't really see her again at the moment. I do have some visions around what happened to Jonbenet at the time of her murder, and I will describe those visions, but I'm going to go back and describe them at the end. So first I want to focus on what Patsy did and what her involvement was, and then I will go back and I will reiterate that information. The next time that I see Patsy is in the morning. She comes downstairs. She actually does not look into Jonbenet's room as she's coming down the stairs. I think that she might be avoiding it to a certain extent. So she continues on down the spiral stairs, and then she sees the note on the bottom of the stairs. Now she knows that since the note has been moved from the small table to the bottom of the stairs, she knows that the plan has been set in motion, and now it's time for her to play her part. She picks up the note, she takes a deep breath, she runs up the spiral staircase, she whips open Jonbenet's door, and sure enough, Jonbenet is not in her bed. So she just goes right into her spiel. She screams at the top of her lungs. She's screaming for John. And this is a scenario that has actually been described many times. As far as I saw around John, I explained this in my last video. He's sitting on the edge of his bed. He's in his boxer shorts and a white t-shirt, and he's just waking up when he hears Patsy scream. So he comes running down the stairs, and she's frantically telling him Jonbenet is gone, and so on and so forth. Now, I did go over that whole situation quite a bit in the last part, so I don't think I'm going to go over it a lot right now. And I think that anybody who's followed the case probably knows what supposedly occurred between the time that Patsy found the note and the time that the police actually showed up at the house. After the initial panic had ensued between Patsy and John, they both ran down the stairs. Patsy called 911. We've all heard the 911 call 1,000 times. It's very strange. Obviously the language that she's using, she says there's been a kidnapping rather than saying my daughter's been taken. Patsy says some other strange things, and then of course there's the speculation as to whether she actually hung up the phone at the end of the 911 call. I did discuss that in my part 3 of this series, but just to recap, I did not see Patsy hang up the phone immediately. She did continue to talk to John, as far as what I'm seeing, after she ended the call with the dispatcher. So like I said in the other parts of the series, I don't necessarily believe what people claim that they heard the Ramseys saying at the end of the 911 call, but I don't dispute that Patsy did not immediately hang up the phone, so that there were voices that you could hear. I'm just not 100% certain that I can go along with what other people have said the Ramseys could be heard saying on that tape. After the 911 call, we know that Patsy proceeded to call over 2 separate sets of friends to help search for Jonbenet, or I'm not really sure what she was calling them over for, but we do know that that occurred and that several people did show up at the house that morning. At that point in time, John Ramsey has run back upstairs to get dressed. Of course, Patsy is already dressed. She claimed many times that she was always the first one awake, that she always got up and she always got herself fully dressed before she got anybody else in the family up, which honestly is not that uncommon for mom to do that, for mom to get up and get dressed and get 100% ready before she gets dad and the kids up to get ready. So it's not that far of a stretch, but in this situation, I'm pretty sure that Patsy just wanted to make 100% certain that she was ready and presentable before all of the chaos ensued. From here on out, I really just see Patsy trying to play her part, trying to perform as the concerned mother. Now, it has been reported on several occasions that John and Patsy Ramsey did not stay anywhere near each other that morning. And throughout the day, while they were allegedly waiting for a phone call to come from the kidnapper, that John basically stayed in the living room and that Patsy stayed with her friends in a den that was in another area of the house. I do see that, and I do believe that Patsy is actively trying to stay away from John. I think that she is worried that John is going to get some kind of an inclination that she might have some kind of idea as to what's going on. I did go into more detail about that in part 3, and I did explain that I really do feel like John did suspect that Patsy wrote the ransom note, and that he started suspecting it on that very day. And I do believe that John Ramsey was discreetly trying to look for other examples of Patsy's handwriting in their house that morning so that he could try to make a comparison. I think that's why he was pretending to look through the mail, and he had made a comment at one point that he was looking for communications from the killer, but I don't think he was actually looking through the mail that morning. I think that he was trying to discreetly look through other pieces of paper or other things that Patsy had actually filled out to see if he could make some kind of comparison to the handwriting on the note itself. So I do think that John was suspicious of Patsy's involvement, and I do believe that his suspicions started that morning. As far as what actually happened to Jonbenet herself that led to her death, I am not going to go into great detail about that because, like I've mentioned before in my videos, I don't like to go into the details of the person's actual death. I think that it's too graphic, and I don't think that anybody even needs to have that information in their head. So I'm just going to describe it in a basic sense and not get too far into the graphic specifics. I see the man that I believe is Gary Oliva. He goes into Jonbenet's room. He takes her out of her bed. She is still sleeping. She has no idea who's picked her up or what is going on. He takes her directly down the stairs and directly down the stairs into the basement. Now, I do believe that Gary Oliva did come in through the basement window, and I believe that he intended to take Jonbenet back out through that same window. I think it's important to mention here, though, that Gary Oliva did not break that window. Now, I don't know if anybody is aware of this or if you remember from the case, but it turned out that John Ramsey had actually broken that window himself when he was trying to get into the house at one point when he had been locked out, and he thought that the window had been fixed, that Patsy had gotten it fixed, but she had never gotten it fixed. So that window was broken before Jonbenet was ever murdered or anything ever even happened as far as a case around Jonbenet. So Gary Oliva did not break that window to get into the house, but I do believe that he did use that window to enter the house because it was already broken, it was already open. So it was easy access. Now, I'm sure everyone is very familiar with the crime scene photos of this case, and there was actually a lot of discussion about a suitcase that had been sitting next to the window that I'm referring to, and it had been speculated that maybe the suitcase was used as a step to get out the window, and John Ramsey had said at one point that he thought that the killer may have intended to use that suitcase to remove Jonbenet from the house. And I do believe that John Ramsey is correct in that assumption because that is what I see. I do see Gary Oliva taking a sleeping Jonbenet and attempting to open that suitcase as if he's going to put her into the suitcase. This is the part where I don't think people realize just how integral that suitcase was to the case, because at this point in time, what I see is that Jonbenet starts to wake up a little bit as Gary Oliva is bending over trying to open this suitcase. She starts to wake up a little bit and she actually urinates. She actually wets her pants and she pees all over. She pees on herself. She pees on him. He gets startled. He slips and he drops Jonbenet. And she lands directly on the concrete floor on her little head. I believe that this is the point at which Jonbenet got her skull fracture. This is the point at which Jonbenet suffered that horrible trauma to her head. I do not believe that anyone hit her with anything. I believe that she was dropped on the concrete floor as Gary Oliva was attempting to put her into the suitcase. And once again, like I said, he was startled because at that time she also urinated on him. I don't believe that he killed her out of retaliation for the wetting her pants or anything like that. I think that he might have actually been telling the truth in his confession where he said that it was an accident, that he slipped, he dropped her, she fell, she got this horrible contusion on her head that even this man could see was going to kill her. And I believe that he honestly thought that he was putting Jonbenet out of her misery when he went ahead with the strangulation. I know that that is a very messed up way of thinking, but you have to understand that this man already wasn't in his right mind. So as far as what he was thinking, this was a mercy killing. He knew that Jonbenet was going to die. He knew there was no way that she was going to make it through that head wound. So he just went ahead and he quote unquote finished her off to put her out of her misery. I do honestly believe 100% that that is the reason that this man decided to kill Jonbenet. At that point in time, obviously the plan had not worked out. Obviously he was not going to be able to fulfill his obligations of staging a kidnapping around Jonbenet. The agreement, I feel, had been that absolutely no harm would come to her. That he was going to take her to an undisclosed location, that he was going to keep her for maybe a day or two, that they were going to sort things out with the quote-unquote ransom money, and then Jonbenet was going to be returned back to the Ramsey family safe and sound. Well, obviously that is not the way that things played out. After Gary Oliva had his accidents, after he botched things, after things did not go as planned, I feel like he had absolutely no option but to just flee, right? It's not like he could go upstairs and tell Patsy, hey, I accidentally killed your daughter instead of kidnapping her. You know, the only option at that point was to flee the scene. Patsy didn't understand that. She didn't expect that. She didn't plan for Jonbenet to be murdered. She planned for Jonbenet to be quote-unquote kidnapped and taken away from the home and kept safe somewhere out of sight, out of mind for a short period of time until the staged plan could play out. Patsy had absolutely no reason to believe that following morning that Jonbenet was no longer alive. You know, that wasn't part of the plan, and she didn't expect her to be dead somewhere in the house. You know, it was all supposed to go very, very differently. And I think that when Jonbenet was found dead, that it was just as much of a shock for Patsy Ramsey as it was for everyone else who was involved there that morning. I could probably continue to discuss my opinions and theories around the case for quite some time, but I don't really know how much more it would actually contribute, so I'm probably going to just kind of try to wrap things up a little bit here. Basically, what it comes down to is that I believe that Patsy Ramsey was having an affair with Alex Hunter, and that is part of the reason that the case was not properly handled. I also believe that Patsy Ramsey was 100% responsible for orchestrating a staged kidnapping. Obviously, after what I've just described, that kidnapping went horribly wrong. I believe that the kidnapping was staged in order to manipulate John in some way, and I think that had to do with Patsy wanting to move back to Atlanta. I think that John Ramsey did suspect that Patsy had some involvement in Jonbenet's death, at least to some extent, and I think that he started to suspect her that very morning. And, I don't know that he continues to suspect her, but I think that Patsy probably took her involvement and her knowledge of what happened to Jonbenet to her grave. As I'm sure everyone is aware, Patsy Ramsey passed away in 2006 from ovarian cancer. So I really do think that. I really do think that she took any information that she had and any knowledge that she had and any involvement that she had with her to her grave. I don't believe that she probably admitted that at all. And there were a couple of strange little comments here and there. There was a book that was written and Patsy allegedly had said, "We didn't mean for this to happen." So people have speculated that, maybe that was some kind of admission of her involvement. But really, that was it. There wasn't a whole lot more than that. It's not like she was constantly making cryptic statements about her possible involvement. She pretty much stuck to her guns that there was a killer on the loose, that someone random had murdered Jonbenet. So those are basically my final thoughts on the Jonbenet Ramsey case. I guess I'm just going to go ahead and wrap this one up. As always, thank you so much for listening. I will definitely be talking to everybody again very, very soon. Bye.